Hey everyone, tonight we're about to dive into the sweltering heat of a medieval forge so intense you probably wouldn't survive it. You're standing in the middle of a landscape whitened by flames, the hot breath of the furnace caressing your face before daybreak. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Tell us where you are and what time it is in your city right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun, sitting on a wooden stool already stiffened by the night's humidity. The cold breeze still insists on shaking in the cracks of the workshop, but you don't have time to shiver. The cold awaits your vital breath and the metal, its definitive form. You put on a thick apron on your body, feeling the heavy leather creaking in protest, and approach the furnace. The air inside it burns as if it held 1,000 miniature suns, emitting an orange glow that makes your eyes water. Each blow of the hammer on the red-hot iron demands a strength that sometimes seems to come from somewhere deep within you. You hold your breath before striking, concentrating on the shape you want to give the metal. A sword? A buckle? Perhaps a blade worthy of the envy of any passing knight. By the mid-14th century, the blacksmith trade was so essential that the king depended directly on them to keep his army well armed. An entire city sprang up around these central forges. But let's face it, you just want to get through the day without losing a finger or a vital organ. The heat recedes for a moment as you pull out the iron hammer. Beads of sweat run down your face, creating small rivulets that find the collar of your apron. Fun fact, in some villages in the Rutland region of England, blacksmiths used to scratch protective symbols on the walls of their furnaces to ward off evil spirits. After all, dancing flames were believed to be portals to the afterlife. You let out a wry smile. If those symbols actually worked, maybe you'd feel safer every time a spark flew your way. You raise the hammer again, feeling its weight and swings synchronize with your heartbeat. Hammering hot metal isn't just about brute force. It's almost a ritual dance, where every misstep can cost you dearly. Historians still debate whether the ideal forge temperature was controlled primarily by the type of coal used or the intensity of the hand blow. You imagine academic debates being conducted by bearded professors swinging torches to demonstrate theories. But for you, nothing else matters beyond the piece taking shape beneath the tip of your hammer. When you dip the iron into cold water, steam rises in a brief flash, causing a hiss so shrill that it makes you jump back, nearly dropping the hammer. You use the second of distraction to wipe the sweat from your forehead and realize that for a moment, you forgot how cold it must be outside. Inside, the temperature easily reaches 1,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to toast a loaf of bread in seconds. But you keep going, transforming that piece of raw iron into something valuable. You know you can't hesitate. The village lord pays you poorly, but he expects your pieces to be finished on time. If you fail, punishments range from fines to forced labor in rat-infested quarries. And let's face it, you want nothing more than to keep all your bones together. Silently, you remember the time you nearly got your thumb pierced by a stray spark, and make an inside joke. Who needs Halloween when you got the forge? The heat returns the favor, burning your wrist, and you swear under your breath. Meanwhile, the crackling of coal and the clanging of a hammer create a soundtrack that only a true aficionado of metallic noise would find soothing. You take a deep breath, smell the mingling of burning wood and sweat, and realize that this symphony will become your most vivid memory. With each strike, the object takes shape, and you find a rare pleasure in watching the metal obey your will. Or at least try to. But make no mistake, this discipline requires years of learning, sweat, and hardened poker faces. Historians estimate that it took an apprentice about 7 years to become a fully skilled blacksmith, and even then many techniques were secret, passed down only within the guilds. You're already in your 4th year of apprenticeship, and you still feel like every day at the forge is a new challenge of endurance. You look at the newly shaped blade and whisper, maybe I should have become a farmer, but that has its own risks like ridicule from neighbors when the crop fails. Yet, at that moment, you imagine yourself lying on the grass, gazing at clouds instead of embers. A joke crosses your mind. Growing tomatoes is more glamorous than kneading molten iron and less chance of tetanus. You chuckle, remembering that infected wounds have wreaked havoc on the health of many colleagues, bringing on medieval malaria, and In extreme cases, tetanus that could kill without warning. The glowing forge continues to glow, and you, sweaty and exhausted, take a deep breath knowing that each finished piece is further proof of your resilience. Historians still debate the impact of these workshops on the economic expansion of medieval cities, but all you care about is producing well to ensure your survival, and hoping that the next day will only begin after a few good hours of rest. You raise the hammer once more, feeling the cold steel in your hand before the red-hot forge turns everything into live coals. Each strike rings out like a subdued thunder, and you realize how much your body complains with each impact. Your arms tremble, the veins stand out under your skin, and your breath escapes in short gasps. The iron, sullen, resists, twisting under the blow, and you smile bitterly. If I wanted something so stubborn, I would have married a mule. Sweat runs in rivulets down your back, trickling down your thick apron and dripping onto your soot-caked shoes. You feel the heat rising from the soles of your feet, as if small volcanoes were about to explode beneath you. With each blow of the hammer, sparks fly up and explode all around you, popping like fireworks at a bizarre festival. For a second, the luminous shards draw arabesques in the air, reminding you that iron, under your blows, is both art and a demonstration of brute force. In the 12th century, great Gothic cathedrals relied on blacksmiths to create the trusses and ironwork that held up the massive stained glass windows, ensuring that heavenly light would illuminate the sacred naves. It's strange to think that something so essential to the grandeur of these temples came from calloused hands and weary hearts. But you're not building a cathedral. You're carving a simple plow blade that barely pays for the coal it uses. As your body works at the rhythm of a machine, your mind wanders to memories of past learning. You recall the practical lesson in which the master blacksmith demonstrated how to bend steel without cracking it. He used a technique so meticulous that it seemed like he was playing the piano instead of turning metal. Remember the clue. If the teacher were a pianist, the symphony would be inaudible under the thunder of the hammer. Each blow of the hammer is also a dialogue with your own resistance. You think of the long hours that have passed since morning. The sun has barely risen and you are already starting. It is a ritual without pause. Warm up, beat, plunge into the bucket of cold water, repeat. The hissing water turns into steam that envelopes you, creating a spectral haze in the room. You let out a sigh of recognition. Nothing like an improvised medieval sauna. Marginal curiosity. In some villages in Eastern Europe, blacksmiths painted little faces on their ironwork. It was believed that this would ward off evil spirits and even ensure a good mood for the wielder of the weapon or tool. You imagine a shotgun with a smile carved into it, begging not to be used, and you involuntarily chuckle. The academic world still debates whether medieval forges exploited the automatic air resource through human breath or whether rudimentary water-powered bellows mechanisms already existed to standardize the temperature. Either way, you know that the breath that gives way to the hammer is fuel as precious as coal, and as tiring as carrying a poetry primer with each stroke. With each impact, the stone floor vibrates beneath your feet. You feel each vibration travel up your spine, echoing in your head like a military drone. If you were to consult a modern doctor, they would probably prescribe rest and painkillers. But in those days, a blacksmith had no luxury. Pain was fuel to keep going. You pause for a moment, wiping your forehead with his arm, and says, "Nothing like a good wine to drown the pain. But for now, I'll settle for some melted candle wax." You watch the curved metal slowly take shape. The tension in your arms eases as you realize the piece is nearly perfect. A final hammer, a light tap, and it settles in a place as it should. The sensation is almost therapeutic despite the throbbing in your hands. It's the kind of dirty pleasure that only those who have tamed a bar of iron can understand. The master smiles at the corner of his mouth when he sees his finished work and jokingly comments that the true blacksmith is the one who makes the iron cry and the dust hear. You let out a tired laugh and reply, "If the iron cries, imagine my spine at the end of the day." Another joke to ease the tension. As you lay down your hammer, you doze off for a while. Nothing too much, just enough to dream of a green field instead of orange flames. In your dream, you run free, without an apron, without oil, and without deadline pressure. You wake up to the sound of metal on metal, and you immediately remember Dreaming is good, but fantasizing won't pay the cold bill. The afternoon approaches, and the cycle begins again. You pick up another piece of raw iron, listen to the metallic sound as the bar slashes against the anvil, and repeat the process. Repetition brings mastery, but also monotony. And let's be honest, soot-smelling monotony is not the definition of relaxation. Still, you press on, because each finished piece is a step toward meeting your quota for the day and avoiding the curses of your feudal lord. You think of the tales bards spread in taverns. They say a certain blacksmith forged a sword that slew a dragon centuries ago. Historians still debate whether this legend is based on any real event or just a little lie invented to lure curious travelers. You imagine the legendary blacksmith, perhaps as exhausted as you, wiping away the sweat as he drinks the wine of victory. As you dry the iron with a cloth, you feel the residual heat on your palms and grimace. This metal is more work than a bratty child. You finally place the piece on the stand and look down the narrow corridor of the workshop, thinking about the rest that is still far away. But you know that the next day you will wake up again and face the hammer as if it were an opponent in a ring. The symphony of the forge never stops. Hammers against anvils, chains moving, bellows blowing, wood groaning. Is the rhythm of life that you have chosen, or that, depending on your point of view, has chosen you? If for a moment, when the blade ends smooth and gleaming, you feel a quiet pride, even exhausted, even dirty, even in need of a massage that didn't even exist in the Middle Ages, you are the conductor of this metallic concerto. You pick up the hammer again for one last strike, enjoying the metallic echo that reverberates off the low ceiling. And as the metal finds the exact shape it was looking for, you whispers to himself, in the end, it's worth every drop of sweat, but never say that out loud to the feudal lord. You step out of the glowing forge and into the world outside. A winter so cold that the iron almost creaks with embarrassment before it even heats in the furnace. The biting air penetrates your coarse cloth collar, reminding you of every strand of exposed skin, while dew turned to frost coats tools and wood. You inhale deeply, catching the strong odor of rotting wood. After all, medieval humidity loved to play hide and seek with barracks and aprons, leaving everything withered and fetid. The cold seeps through the blades of your boots and into your bones, forcing you to shake your fingers before gripping the hammer. Your apron, soaked in sweat days ago, now exudes a musty smell that would make even a medieval mouse turn away in disgust. There is no luxury of clothes dryers. The often damp reserve would burn slowly, but it is barely enough to keep the heart of the forge hot. You bend over to feed the furnace, letting out a sigh. If I wanted to live in an Airbnb-style freezer, I would just become an ice cream vendor. In the 15th century, villages in northern Europe faced seasonal flooding when the snow melted, inundating workshops and destroying stocks of coal and iron ore. Frost made wooden gates creak like a ghost, and moisture ate away at sawdust and straw, turning sacks of coal into slippery balls of mud. Do you remember the day you slipped in a muddy courtyard, nearly doing a juggler's somersault? All that was missing was a red clown nose and the audience applauding. As you walk, you stop your feet on the stone floor to warm up your circulation. Each step echoes within a regular rhythm, mixing with the metallic sound of the anvil. The humid atmosphere causes a trail of mist to curl around your ankles, and you find yourself muttering, at the top of the things I didn't ask for list, free indoor mist. The warm steam from a quick shower in a makeshift pot brings momentary relief, but it soon disappears, hurling you back into the station's frigid embrace. Fun fact, some blacksmiths would spread animal skins under the stone floors to create an insulating layer. Imagine your medieval shag rug, but with a bearskin look and a strong country smell. You tried this once and found that the makeshift layer actually helped, unless a hungry mouse decided to set up a midnight feast on your rug. Historians still argue about whether the so-called Little Ice Age began in the 14th or 15th century, and whether it was a result of volcanic eruptions, solar changes, or the simple fact that no one had central heating. You laugh at the idea of global heat back then. Time, his biggest challenge was keeping a corner warm enough to not turn into a human ice block. As he carries a large iron ingot, he feels the weight and the biting cold simultaneously. The sensation is half forced weight training, half cold resistance test. You grip the barbell and try to joke. There's nothing like an iron dumbbell at -5 degrees Celsius to work out and freeze your brain at the same time. The hammer bangs and bangs and bangs, and the sparks, so hot, flicker in the frigid air like fireflies at a Christmas Eve party. The icy wind whispers through cracks in the workshop wall, making a sound like the giggles of children playing hide-and-seek. You imagine medieval ghosts mocking the smelly blacksmiths, but you quickly focus on keeping your hammer steady. With each breath of cold air, your breath forms clouds that quickly disappear, like promises of orders that never arrive on time. Fun fact, in medieval England, blacksmiths believed that dripping bacon grease on the iron rods before hammering helped lubricate the metal and reduce cracking, and also gave the forge a distinctive barbecue aroma. You tried it once, and it did smell tempting, until you remembered that the grease would stick to the walls and attract insects the size of finger puppets. You look up at the sky through the fogged-up window and see heavy snow clouds about to break through. You still have enough firewood left for 2 more hours. After that, it's a guessing game between breath and patience. How do I survive longer without burning my lungs or turning into a popsicle? In the meantime, you try to keep up the pace, hammering away so that the iron heats up quickly, because the minute it takes to heat the anvil is too long to freeze your soul. Working in a forge in this extreme cold requires rhythmic steps, blowing the bellows with a face red with effort, hammering the red-hot iron before it cools too much, plunging in the cold water, and repeating. A cycle that, if you think about it, seems like a kind of pleasurable torture. You take the opportunity to make mental jokes. Whoever invented this system should win the Nobel Prize for sadomasochistic creativity. Even so, the iron responds. The heavy blows mold you. The smoke gives you the aura of a weary warrior, and the incongruous sweat, because you still sweat beneath the layers, runs cold down your back. It's a spectacle of contrast that only a true aficionado of heat stress would understand. You sigh, put down the hammer, and touch your chest, which is purple with cold. If only there was some nice hot tea here. In truth, tea was an imported luxury item, as expensive as gold, and the hottest brew you could get came from local roots boiled in a rusty cauldron. But at that moment, just thinking about the sweet taste almost warmed your heart. The day is drawing to a close, the snow falling slowly, and the forge, by contrast, shines like a beacon of human endurance. You gather up your tools, gently tapping them to dislodge the ice and make one last joke. It's like flushing dry ice, always a surprise. You emerge from the workshop with your body numb and your spirit swollen with pride. Surviving the metal winter means not only forging iron, but also forging your own determination. Historians acknowledge that the ability to keep a forge running in extreme weather conditions fueled the growth of cities in the medieval North. And you, sucking in a last breath of warmth, know that tomorrow you'll be back at the anvil, cold or not, because, let's face it, you don't have many alternative career options. You stand at the anvil when a spark flies almost into your eye, reminding you that in a medieval forge, even the slightest carelessness can cost you dearly. Each time the hammer meets the red-hot iron, a shower of sparks shoots out around you, like shooting stars in slow motion. You hold your breath, puff out your chest, and turn your face away, almost like a dancer dodging imaginary lasers in a futuristic show, only much hotter. The heat from the sparks flying from the anvil is treacherous. They can fly for miles and pierce the leather of an apron. In many villages, blacksmiths required apprentices to wear double-folded shirts of thick linen, a rough reinforcement that offered some protection against superficial burns. Even so, scars were common on the arms and hands of more experienced blacksmiths, badges of honor that told stories of battles against fire itself. You feel the typical tingling sensation before the burn, that unpleasant shiver that runs through your skin. As you deflect the hammer, your back arches and you laugh nervously. 5-star service, free heat, and a laser effect as a bonus. 3 quick jokes a minute help to bear the tension. And let's face it, laughing is better than crying when the forge is like a volcano. One wrong spark could set the sawdust bin next door ablaze. In the 14th century, fires started by blacksmiths were responsible for about 10% of urban disasters, consuming entire workshops and sometimes entire villages of straw and wood. You've heard the advice to keep a bucket of water nearby, but in intense heat, it can evaporate before it can put out the fire. As you hammer the metal, sparks fly in all directions, popping like popcorn. Each pop is a metallic cacophony, irritating yet strangely addictive, almost like horror ASMR. You make an inside joke. 4D cinema in 1D. Live metal popcorn. This lightness of mind helps you focus on the rhythm. Hammer, spark, and so on. Marginal curiosity. Some blacksmiths attach strips of tanned leather to the cuffs of their aprons to prevent hot sparks from slipping down the sleeves and sticking to the skin. It was not a perfect shield, but an ingenious improvisation made from the skins of local animals. You tried this hack once and discovered that the leather protecting your wrist also became soaked in sweat, turning the leather into an uncomfortable sponge. Tensions rise when a piece of metal suddenly comes loose and flies almost like a projectile. You raise your hands to protect your face and let out a dry joke. Mission almost impossible. Dodge an ion projectile without superpowers. At that moment, the smell of ozone mixes with that of burning coal, creating a pungent aroma that you secretly associate with the smell of a dignified profession. Our protection was rare, but rudiments of bronze visors or thin metal plates suspended by chains existed. Historians still debate whether these protections were in common use or the privilege of master blacksmiths in large cities, since the cost of making a visor offered greater profit than covering a rural workshop. But for you, any extra scrap of metal was too little profit to waste. As you resume your work, your gaze darts through the smoke and sparks until you find the tip of the blade in its near-perfect shape. Each spark that leaps out marks progress, but also constant danger. You make another inside joke. Medieval Blacksmith's Manual. Step 1. Avoid fire. Step 2. Don't become a human steak. You take a deep breath, feeling the heat in your chest, and your heart beat faster. The sparks cast flickering shadows on the walls, transforming the workshop into a spectacle of light and darkness, almost cinematic. If you were to watch the scene on a movie screen today, you would think it was state-of-the-art special effects. There, it is just another day at work. Curious fact, in some regions of France, it was believed that sparks that flew from the anvil during the cooling of the melt transformed into protective spirits of the forged object, imbuing the blade with luck in battle. Some blacksmiths kept the sparks in small ceramic jars as amulets, a practice that, however, rarely survived the heat of everyday life. You watch as the sparks glow and change color as the temperature of the metal changes, from fiery red to incandescent yellow, a rainbow of heat that makes your eyes water. The technique of heating to the exact tone point was so prized that in organized guilds, competing masters kept records of colors and temperatures to teach apprentices, a quasi-scientific method for crafting patterns. Even with all this care, the risk remains. You recall an incident in which a large spark jumped directly onto a nearby oil drum, causing a small fire that was only contained thanks to two helpers throwing sand on the flame. It was the kind of scene you don't want to repeat even in your dreams, but in reality, it could happen at any time. As you remove the final piece from the anvil and drop it into the bucket of water to temper, you feel the steam rise in puffs that singe the hairs on your face. Reflexively, you close your eyes and laugh softly. Medieval acid rain, not coveted in any travel package. The combination of heat, smoke, and sparks creates an almost mystical atmosphere, a spectacle that requires nerves of steel. Finally, you put down the hammer, rub your aching hands, and breathe a sigh of relief. The floor is strewn with cooled sparks, tiny, shiny pebbles that look like comet fragments that have fallen into the workshop. You look at them like lost treasures, wondering if someone will ever collect fossilized sparks to display in a museum. Despite the constant danger, the feeling of mastering fire and metal fuels his pride. You wipe the sweat from your forehead, look at the hammer, and joke. I'm a demigod of controlled fire, almost a dragon barber. One more joke to end the act before moving on to the next craft mission. You stare at the worn axe on the makeshift anvil, its blades still showing burrs and flakes that resemble the teeth of a hungry shark. Sharpening, to the medieval blacksmith, is not just passing a stone over metal. It is almost alchemy, a ritual that transforms dirt and rust into sharpness. You position the blade on the whetstone, tilting it with barber-like precision, and begin to slide the metal in an almost hypnotic motion, back and forth, in a rhythm so repetitive that it sends your mind wandering to the rhythms of tribal drums. The use of natural stones to sharpen weapons dates back to ancient Egypt, where marl and sandstone were used to sharpen copper blade around 2,500 years before Christ. It's interesting to think that, millennia later, you're still following in similar footsteps, only swapping Egypt for the cold mists of Normandy. Between visits, you joked, you'd do well a hot stone spa, except instead of feet, you have axe blades. Each slip on the stone generates microscopic sparks, almost like stardust falling in slow motion. You sit on a hunched stool, feeling your lower back protest, and watch the metal take on a dull sheen before revealing the gleaming edge. It's a process that requires the calm and patience of a monk, something you definitely don't bring to lunch, but it seems essential to avoid becoming a snack for some crazy lumberjack. In the 13th century, watermills began to power heavy whetstones for blacksmiths in riverside towns, increasing sharpening speed by up to 50% compared to manual effort. Imagine, you could sharpen 10 axes instead of 2, but you'd miss out on the opportunity to exercise your arms and earn honorable scars. You drop ironic laughs. Medieval productivity. Kill 3 times as many carpenters and heat a capybara's hoof with the steam. Meanwhile, you touch on the blade is the difference between a fancy buckle and an axe that shreds logs like paper. You adjust the angle to about 25 degrees, finding the perfect edge for cutting diagonally. The precision reminds you of a medieval surgeon, except instead of scalpel, your instrument is the blade that demarcates the boundaries between villages. Fun fact, in some Bavarian villages, blacksmiths mixed powdered eggshells into the mortar of their whetstones, believing that the extra calcium made the blade sing louder when cutting wood. That is, it produced a high-pitched sound that indicated an efficient cut. You tried this exotic recipe once and swore you heard a chorus of birds being sliced into the air. Academic debate rages on at universities over whether these concoctions are ineffective folk tricks or genuine technical improvements that improve the hardness of the edge. You imagine white-bearded professors gesturing at blades like conductors conducting a metal opera, but for you the ultimate test is simple. The more the axe splits effortlessly, the better. You dip the blade into a bucket of water to remove loose particles, and the hiss makes you jump. The reaction is so strong that you nearly knock over your empty mug of cheap beer. You joke sarcastically. Nothing like seasoning an axe and quenching thirst at the same time. Deep down, you know that this quick soak also seals the edge, sealing micro cracks and increasing its durability, a gift of accidental science. With the blade clean, you move on to the final step, polishing it with a flannel cloth soaked in linseed oil. The low friction and oil create a protective varnish, shining like freshly polished silver under flickering torches. You run the cloth in circular motions, feeling the silky texture, and joke, if this blade were a pair of shoes, it would need cream and a brush every morning. It's not just a matter of aesthetics, though. The oil prevents moisture from forming rust before use, especially in humid climates like the one you live in. Historians still debate whether the felt and oil polishing method was invented in Persia or Western Europe. You might want to go to the place of origin just to sample the local tea, but for now, you're content to keep your axe ready for the next job. As you slide your finger carefully, without pressing of course, you feel the cut that would make even the thickest wooden handles split with ease. The satisfaction is almost hedonistic, even better than an expensive massage, if there was one. You chuckle softly. Nothing like a virtual severed finger to remind you that I'm alive. When you finally rest the axe on its rest, it gleams like a gladiator's trophy. You wipe away the soot and oil residue from your hands and sigh. Medieval alchemy, turning copper and coal into nightmares for lazy lumberjacks. The symphony of sharpening echoes through the workshop, the steady gliding over stone, the hiss of water, the whisper of oily cloth. Each sound is a reminder that, in the end, blacksmith and metal are partners in a rustic ballet of creation and destruction. You close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and remember, back in that furnace, you nearly lost your thumb, but now, with your impeccable axe, you feel the power to tame not only fire, but also iron itself. You examine your calloused hands before dipping them into the bucket of cold water, noticing tiny cracks and cuts that have become inseparable companions since the first week of apprenticeship. Each crack is an invitation for medieval germs. After all, tetanus and malaria don't respect vacations, and an infection could mean months of fever, delirium, and in severe cases, premature closure of the funnel in the forge. You take a deep breath and make an inside joke. Who needs a reality show about illness when you have a forge? As you carefully remove wound cleanser, a paste of red wine with local herbs said to have antiseptic properties, you smell the spicy freshness of rosemary and thyme, mixed with the sourness of cheap wine. A side note, in some villages, blacksmiths chewed sassafras leaves to purify the blood before applying them to the wound, a technique that could be as delicious as it was risky. You remember wincing when the master tasted the brownish tea and proudly declared, "I've never tasted anything so honest." In the 14th century, city registry records mention that blacksmiths were required to pay additional fees to guilds precisely to have access to collective medical services, since cuts and burns were so common that they accounted for up to 15% of registered work absences. You think of the last stamped receipt you saw. It looked more like a debt note than an authorization for treatment, and smiled bitterly. Medieval health insurance, pierce, bleed, and hope for closure. You apply a thin layer of boar fat to the deepest wound, remembering the master's advice. Keep the area lubricated to prevent the blood from hardening and forming ulcers. This trick, according to folk tradition, accelerated healing, but it could attract hungry flies that, if left unchecked, would turn into thick slices of flying protein. Historians still debate whether this method was actually effective or just cheap folklore to distract blacksmiths from more intense pain. You sigh. Medieval medical technology, tested on humans and approved by doctors who prefer to ride horses than treat patients. The heat from a forge helps dry the makeshift bandage, but you need to get back to work before the feudal lord notices your delay. Each blow of the hammer makes the bandage squeak against your fist, and you adjust your hand to keep the pain at the periphery of your consciousness. The buzzing of mosquitoes, a regular guest of open wounds, is almost an annoying ASMR. Bees is BE. Welcome to the medieval bloodletting spa. 3 jokes a minute keep your spirits intact, ensuring that the deafening sound of the hammer isn't the only thing echoing in your mind. You remember the time a helper, desperate to close a cut on his thumb, wrapped it with wood shavings, a cheap technique that worked until the bandage absorbed too much heat and gave off a faint smoke. You joke, fire on the finger was a bonus of the blacksmith combo. Still, avoiding infection was a matter of life or limb, and you continue to apply ground flaxseed over the bandage, believing in the sticky power of natural oils. The mainstream historical fact is that until the 15th century, tetanus was known as spasmodic death, and blacksmiths lived under the shadow of that grim name, because any contact with oxide could trigger fatal muscle contractures within days. You shudder to think. The next spark could not only pierce leather, but inoculate treacherous bacteria under your skin. As you walk through the workshop, feeling each step vibrate your affected bone, you let out a sarcastic laugh. The only obstacle course you do around here is against your own infection. The metallic aroma in the air takes on an acidic note when you remember that rusty iron was considered an ally of tetanus. A cruel irony in a game where the villain disguises himself as raw material. Extra side fun fact. In some rural communities in Belgium, families of blacksmiths kept live chickens in the yard to scratch around their bandages, believing that their nimble feathers helped keep large insects away, or at least distract them from human flesh. You might consider letting the rooster loose in a barn, but that would invite more chaos than protection. The academic world continues to debate the extent to which malaria, carried by mosquitoes in nearby swamps, affected blacksmiths in greater numbers than the general population, as they labored in stagnant water to temper metal. You shake your head. Death trap, water for tempering blades, and a breeding ground for killer mosquitoes. With each bite, you feel an irritating itch that threatens to steal your focus, but you pretend it's just an invitation to hammer more. As you pick up the hammer again, you notice the thin line of rust forming around old cuts, a testament to the battle between you and the metal. And joke, rust in the veins, pure adrenaline. That damp smell of contaminated iron serves as a reminder. Neglecting care was the quickest shortcut to an anonymous grave. You close your eyes briefly, feeling the hot iron in the hammer and the hypnotic sound of the anvil pulling you back to the present. The pain that bacteria brings mixes with the tiredness of the work, a mixture that, because it is so constant, seems to have become part of the daily fuel. And, in a way, it is. Without scars, there are no stories to tell on the taverns at night. Finally, You end the day by carefully cleaning your tools, applying fine ash to each cut, another rustic method that is said to neutralize bacteria, and packing your bloody apron for the next morning. You sigh, who said blacksmiths didn't have a spa routine? Even though you're exhausted, each healed cut is a victory against the invisible enemy that haunts your craft. You extinguish the torches, feel the night chill envelop the village, and whisper, surviving until tomorrow would be nice. Becoming a folk fantasy is now my goal. And as you walk home with your aching wrist, you know that if the tetanus doesn't take, the feudal lord will demand more steel. And that is almost as cruel a sentence as any medieval fever. You feel the weight of responsibility even before you've rested from the previous day. The feudal lord mounts his draft horse, that sturdy animal, more accustomed to hard work than you, and arrives at the workshop with the look on his face of someone expecting miracles at the first blow of the hammer. Every time he sighs, you realize the magnitude of the deadline. I need 50 horseshoes by dawn. And let's face it, not even Beyoncé responds so quickly to fan messages. The pressure starts in the morning, before breakfast. The clerk of the manor has already spread rumors that being late means a fine. The scribe writes down your name with a bold lie. The guard peers at the gate, watching your movements with the patience of a cat about to pounce. You put on your apron and, before touching the gavel, take a sip of water, a short sip, because you know that every second counts. In the 13th century, records of court supplies show that feudal lords punished tardiness not only with fines and coin, but also with sentences of extra labor on the moors, in hospitable areas where wind and rain were two of the few friendly visitors. You sigh as you remember that primitive spreadsheet of obligations, scribbled on parchment, indicating that 3 hours late equals 2 extra days at the quarry. Meanwhile, the feudal lord watches your progress as if it were a marathon of horses. He shakes his head, grimaces, and you do your best to keep calm. It's okay, my lord, if it was easy, they called you a baker. The inside joke helps to keep the humor, because laughing is better than crying while the entire fief awaits your creations. You know there's no room for error. Every poorly made piece can be rejected and deducted directly from your paycheck, and direct deductions in the Middle Ages don't involve Excel spreadsheets. They involve truncheons and disapproving looks. With every bent blade, every warped blade, you imagine the entire fiefdom grumbling, fief of time. Marginal fun fact. In some regions of France, there is a custom of sending a group of messengers to collect payment for blacksmiths who are late, and they would use drums to announce the time station, a beat that would echo through the village and ensure that no one would relax too early. You swear you heard those drums once, and for a second, you thought it was an invitation to a party until you realized it was a demand for horseshoes. Tension mounts as the deadline report is updated. There are now 70 horseshoes by sundown tomorrow, and you haven't even finished 50 today. Your heart races and you make a sarcastic joke. Medieval softcore, only if it bends at the neck. Still, you can't waver. The fief survives thanks to your ability to keep horses well shod for war or grain hauling. Academic debate rages over how much power a feudal lord actually had to impose punitive terms without going through a council of nobles. Some scholars argue that regional courts existed, while others argue that the lord's rule was absolute law in the village. You imagine toga-clad scholars discussing medieval law in a clearing of oak trees, ignoring the mud puddle next door. But to you, the law is recorded in the metallic sound of a wax seal snapping shut. You grab the hammer and start a frantic rhythm. Hammer, anvil, bellows, repeat. Each beat sounds like a hurried metronome, reminding you that time is the most valuable currency in the feud. Your sweat dripping onto the heated iron creates high-pitched noises, as if the metal is protesting. Enough of the rush, you madman. You smile awkwardly and mentally respond. Silence, friend. I have a horde of horses waiting. In the distance, you hear the creaking of the tower doors and know that the Lord will be inspecting again in a few moments. You make one last joke. Feudal hotel check-in, courtesy of the delay. Then you focus on the workflow, mentally dividing the tasks into blocks, as if you were a 21st century production manager. Mainstream historical fact. In large English manors in the 14th century, the production of metal tools and items accounted for up to 30% of local income, making the efficiency of blacksmiths a critical factor in the regional economy. You imagine boring reports of production balances, but you prefer the heat of the forge to numbers on parchment. Even so, speed cannot compromise quality. Bent blades mean rework, and unfortunately, rework is a direct ally of feudal fury. You rethink the cut, look at the piece, and make a quick joke. Express blacksmithing. Get there fast and get out alive. The anvil returns the sound of each hammer blow, reinforcing your focus. You remember the day you delivered 100 shield bolts before dawn, a workshop record, and received a rare smile from the feudal lord. It was like winning an Olympic trophy, except without the medal, the glory, or the applause. Sure, the extra payment was a jug of cheap mead, but that night you slept proud. Now, with the new deadline, that triumph seems distant, but you use the memory as fuel. If running were art, I would be the Michelangelo of metal. It's easier to internalize that joke than to face the look of impatience that returns with each visit to the fiefdom. As you work, you incorporate organizational strategies, separating finished pieces into piles, mentally noting the sequence of shapes, timing each batch with the precision of a student of stars or a desperate blacksmith. You look at the improvised sundial on the wall and joke. A broken clock also tells time, right? The bellows blow, the anvil clangs, the fiefdom murmurs. You finish the last set of horseshoes, give them a final hammer blow to ensure they fit perfectly, and dip them all in water to season. The hiss echoes as a signal for the end of the shift, at least for today. The feudal lord returns, measuring the pile of horseshoes, examining every curve, every shape, every nook and cranny. You hold your breath. Is this approval or punishment? He gives a slow, almost dramatic music video-worthy nod and says, "Good work for today." You let out a sigh that seems to have crossed the entire village, letting out a silent joke. Mission accomplished, feudal captain. Relief invades your body, but you already know tomorrow there will be a new challenge. You push open the solid wooden door and enter a hushed room where the guild masters gather in a semicircle, each one guarding the pride of the guild with the look of a man defending its honor with his nails and hammers. The atmosphere is mysterious. Torches flicker on the damp walls, casting dancing shadows across worn banners bearing crossed hammers. You feel the weight of the ritual before you even take your place, as if every cubic inch of air is charged with promises and secrets. Loyalty to the guild brings real benefits. Fair prices for coal, access to noble customers, and protection from opportunistic competitors. You had a taste of this security when, one frosty morning, a rival ironworks threatened to cut off your supply, but a simple guild seal provided a letter of credit to keep the coal burning in your forge. It was almost as satisfying as watching a helper trip over his own apron and wet the anvil in embarrassment. But nothing comes for free. Each month you pay your share of the fee, calculated on the total output of blades, horseshoes, and shield bolts. If you were late with a payment, your name is whispered through the halls, and rumor has it that only the silence of oblivion and banishment can hurt more than a charcoal burn. You have already experienced a late fee. 3 silver coins short and a public lecture that made even the cobwebs in the workshop tremble with embarrassment. The annual payment for promotion from apprentice to companion was almost like a test drive of death. You saved up for weeks, willing to work in the rain to earn the necessary denarii. When you finally presented your stamp parchment, you were greeted with a pat on the back and a welcome to the club that sounded more like good luck. You'll need it. Still, it was worth every penny. The companionship allowed you to negotiate contracts in neighboring villages and, believe me, paid for several meals of moldy bread. Fun fact, in some parts of Eastern Europe, there is a custom of drinking a sip of blessed mead while swearing allegiance to the guild, as if the drink would imbue courage and ward off evil spirits. Although you might think the only spirit that needed warding off was your drunken reflection in a barrel. The ritual went on for so long that the last time you participated, you almost missed your hammering time and only realized it when the anvil started heating up without you. This sense of brotherhood is also surrounded by secret codes. Passwords exchanged at workshop doors, discreet signals tapped on banisters, and hidden entrances behind shelves of bundles of coal. You felt like a medieval secret agent, punching your chest to transmit the agreed signal, and almost welcomed a sewer rat into your home thinking it was a master in disguise. But it's not all a game of brotherhood. Historians still debate whether guilds actually spurred the advancement of metalworking techniques or whether, on the contrary, They locked the craft into rigid traditions that held back innovation for centuries. While some argue that the standardization of tools increased the quality of production, others argue that the burden of taxes and rituals stifled promising inventors. Inside the hall, you catch the glances of older companions who hold closely guarded secrets of metal alloying. Some pose as silent mentors. Others whisper theories about cooling spices that would make even the crudest steel sing. You've tried to pry one of these formulas out of small talk, but have always been greeted with an enigmatic smile. Premium package, my friend. Fat wallet, open mind. Just kidding. You even tried to offer a chicken to press for the annual fee, but the offer was met with snickers and a recommendation to bring something worth as much as a barrel of ale. You since learned that when it comes to bargaining in the guild, nothing beats shiny coins and promises of quick delivery. The fraternity also imposes subtle censures. If you question traditional methods excessively, you risk earning the master's gaze, that icy raise of the eyebrow that sends shivers down your spine. You've seen colleagues spend entire nights discussing the logic of a particular finish, only to be asked to get back to work in a not-so-subtle way. And yet this cord of control offers something rare in an uncertain world, a sense of purpose and community. Do you remember when a fire devastated half the village and the guild coordinated repairs, providing axes, iron, and even military reinforcements to maintain safety? This gesture, for you, was more valuable than any monetary benefit, almost like receiving an iron hug in the midst of chaos. Quit joke. There's nothing like forgetting your monthly bill to find out who your true friends and metal cassocks are. But the fact is, when the thunder of hammers aligns in unison in the fraternity, you feel like you're part of something bigger than your little smoking furnace. And at the end of that ritualistic day, as you leave the room with your new seal of recognized companion, you take a deep breath and joke with your own echo. Welcome to the union of noise and soot, where retirement is as big a mystery as the secrets of the perfect league. You look at the pile of iron or in the corner of the forge and feel the weight of each stone before you even pick it up. It's not just the physical effort of moving them, but the cost that comes with each piece. Tributes to the feudal lord, guild dues, transportation to your workshop. The real price of each handful of iron was counted in sweat, coins, and sometimes in concessions of loyalty. You adjust the handles of the large leather sack that carries the stones and joke. Who would have thought iron would have such sentimental value? The price of iron ore varied according to the seasonal harvest and trade routes. In years when coal, which, remember, fuels the furnace, was harvested poorly, iron became even more expensive because miners had no way to purify it properly. Historically, records from the mid-13th century show that during certain weeks, the price of iron ore would rise by as much as 40% when heavy rains blocked carriage roads. You may recall paying nearly 2 silver coins more just to secure raw materials before a storm. And let's face it, 2 coins in one hand and a nail in the other could change in value in a matter of seconds. To get around this, some blacksmiths would venture out as passing merchants. They would buy ore from one village and resell in their own, pocketing the profit. You tried this test once, hauling sacks of iron over muddy trails, avoiding highwaymen and bandits and goblins, and ended up with a sore wrist, a torn sack, and almost no profit. Inside joke, medieval mining business. Zero profit, 100% adventure. Marginal curiosity. In the mountainous regions of Central Europe, there was a custom for blacksmiths to exchange, or for craft beer at the local tavern. It was the stone and malt currency that kept the small village's economy circular. You almost entered into this bargain, but decided against it when you realized that carrying barrels on a freight truss was as heavy as the ore itself. Meanwhile, professional traders called traders de rouet traveled in caravans protected by armed guards to transport iron and coal in large quantities. These merchants could negotiate better prices and guarantee delivery, even in times of war, but they charged a commission that only a wealthy baron would be willing to pay. You can imagine heated debates over percentages of profit, scalps ripped off in anger, and at the end, a contract signed with goose quill on parchment, a sideshow to their work on the anvil. However, shortages were not always avoidable. At peaks in demand, when armies marched or castles began renovations, they would simply disappear from the market. In 1291, during the construction of the walls of Conwy in Wales, The head smith paid the equivalent of almost half of his monthly output just to keep the smith supplied, as the king demanded that the walls be built without delay. Imagine working under that stress. Royal smithy, paid dearly or jump the wall. Academic debate persists over the extent to which these price fluctuations influenced the migration of blacksmiths between medieval kingdoms. Some say the promise of good profits drove artisans across mountains and rivers, while others argue that insecurity and the risk of assassination, yes, there were robberies, kept many in their home forges. You laugh bitterly. Metal migration, zero-star planes, lodgings of pure mud. To maintain some autonomy, some blacksmiths stored their own reserves of ore, hiding stones in underground tunnels or secret chests. In a nearby village, you heard of a fellow blacksmith who had dug a stone chamber beneath his granary to store iron without paying monthly dues to the guild. When the guild finally found out, the blacksmith was forced to pay a fine equivalent to 3 months of taxes, and was also denied the right to trade outside the village limits for a year. You smile and shake your head. Secret stash, public headache. Through it all, the ore remained the heart of his craft. Without it, there was no fire, no hammer, no craft. Each block of iron represented a promise to create something that exceeded the weight of the raw material itself. A custom belt clip, a blade that would cut through wood in seconds, a horseshoe that would sustain horses on epic journeys. Responsibility and cost were intertwined in every cubic inch of iron. You lift the last block of the day, and before placing it in the furnace, you make one last joke. The true black gold of the ancient world, only colder to the touch. The flames embrace you, and you breathe in the warmth that, however painful, still lends eloquence to the craft. You push open the creaking door of the forge in the twilight silence, and immediately feel the chill of darkness creeping into the dusty corners. Shadows dance to the faint rhythm of the torches, and for a moment you swear you hear wings shivering the air. Bats, of course, the most frequent nocturnal visitors to this metal temple. You close your eyes and listen to the distant echo of water droplets dripping from the rotting wooden ceiling, each ping repeating like a macabre metronome. In many medieval villages, blacksmiths would hang upside-down horseshoes over the threshold of the workshop to ward off witches and the evil eye. The iron was believed to create a reservoir of good luck and keep evil forces out of the shop. You grimace as you think of your own scrap charm, a crooked horseshoe held together by a bent nail, which despite everything is still there, creaking every time the wood contracts in the cold. In the flickering light, you scan the walls covered in scratched symbols, crude pentagrams, iron crosses, barely legible inscriptions in popular Latin. A side note, in some regions of Alsace, blacksmiths scratch the acronym ATX above the furnace, short for Anima Protexa Christi, in the belief that these 3 letters protected the soul from uncontrolled flames and treacherous blazes. You touch your thumb to one of these lines, feeling the irregular relief on the leather of your apron, and murmur, "Selective protection, but does it work against sparks?" As you relight the bellows, the hiss of air entering the furnace sounds like an unearthly sigh. Historians still debate whether these superstitions were actually created by the craftsmen themselves to control their fear of the unknown, or whether they were imposed by ecclesiastical authorities trying to keep the craft within divine parameters. You imagine toga-clad jesters waving serious scrolls, debating whether a scratch on the wall was as valuable as a sincere prayer. The smell of hot iron mingles with the bittersweet aroma of stale beer left to ferment in a dark corner. You approach the anvil, and before striking, notice a bat hiding in the recess of a beam, its ears rotating as it catches each metallic vibration. Some colleagues believe these bats are messengers of ancient spirits, protectors of the eternal flame, but you doubt any of them paid rent for roosting there. In the 15th century, record from nearby monasteries mentioned that convents sent singing monks to the smithies to exorcise supposed spark demons with sacred hymns. You smile as you remember the last time a choir went off-key inside the workshop. Their voices echoed so loudly that they helped scatter hot embers against the opposite wall, creating a tiny crater of soot. Failed exorcism, gratuitous decoration, you joked at the time. Meanwhile, the tap-tap of your hammer against the anvil seems to attract all sorts of nocturnal noises. Creaking boards, clicking rubber from heavy shoes, vague whispers that may or may not be just the wind. Curious fact: in certain villages in northern Europe, blacksmiths would carry a vial of holy water left by priests after baptisms. They considered this liquid to be a repellent to evil spirits, sprinkling drops of it on the floor, in the dark corners before starting the night shift. You, pragmatist, prefer to use regular water and pray not to encounter any supernatural threats. The corridors of the workshop become a maze of shadows whenever you stray from the furnace. Your footsteps echo like low notes in a cautious melody, and you mutter to yourself, "I prefer bats to giant rats." But behind the joke lies a genuine warning. Nocturnal rodents are also attracted to heat, and no one wants an army of rats stealing cracks in their coal sacks. Academic debate rages over how much these superstitious practices influenced actual working techniques, whether the scratch symbols have practical value, as safety reminders, or a pure theater to calm nerves before nights of non-stop vigilance. You shake your head and return to the bellows, thinking that if crude designs prevented accidents, there would be crosses painted on a hammer by now. With each blast, the furnace roars louder, illuminating the marks on the floor and revealing a dark stain, perhaps dried blood from an old mistake. You inspect it closely, joking, "This must have been a scene of a reality show about failures." Then you wipe the hammer on the oily cloth, keeping your eyes open for any suspicious movement. The bats, in turn, seem curious about you. One of them floats close to your head, and you silently joke, "Miniature skull, VIP visit." The creature insists on hovering, as if trying to understand the purpose of that metallic clang. Local stories tell that a blacksmith called this species guardian of the embers, believing that the bat's flight indicated the correct temperature of the forge. You pick up the hammer again and tap lightly, producing a higher-pitched sound that catches the bat's attention. The little animal spins around, flapping its wings, and you take the opportunity to observe the way the light reflects off its translucent membranes. Flying ASMR, you think, analyzing each soft tap and each choreographed movement. Suddenly, a loud crash echoes from the coal bin, probably an old piece of wood giving way under the weight. You pause, raise your hammer, and whisper, "If it were a ghost, welcome to the metal show." In response, there's only a piercing silence, which made your heart beat a little faster. Before dipping the metal into the bucket of water to temper it, you touch the protective symbol engraved on the rim of the anvil, a simple circle with 3 dots inside, which local lore says was meant to keep treacherous sparks from reaching your eyes. Extra side fun fact: in Thuringia, the combination of the circle and 3 dots was believed to mimic protective constellations seen in the night sky, creating a mystical connection between the blacksmith and the stars. You chuckle softly, wondering how many of your classmates actually understood the astronomical reference. As the steam rises in sync with the remaining sparks, you remember to clean your apron, as you will be back before dawn tomorrow. Between shadows and DIY superstitious, you find a rare comfort. The certainty that, even in the darkness, there is a ritual, a choreography of beliefs and functions that keeps you in control of the metallic chaos. And if some nocturnal entity decides to test you, you will know exactly where to place 2 hammer blows to get the attention of the guardian bat. You set the hammer aside for a moment and survey the tools lined up on the table. Chisels, punches, flat-headed hammers, and in the center, a set of fine files that gleam in a flickering torchlight. Today, your focus is on metalworking, the work of shaping thin sheets of metal into containers, pipes, and sheets, an art as ancient as it is mysterious. You pick up one of these files, run your fingers over the wooden handle, and feel the grooves, a tactile reminder that each tool holds generations of secrets. In 13th century manuscripts, there are detailed descriptions of tinsmiths making cauldrons and water pipes for thermal baths in medieval cities. These pieces had to be precisely shaped to prevent leaks, which required refined technique and a great deal of patience. It is remarkable to think that before these records, no one knows for sure whether there was an organized craft of tinsmithing or whether it was simply blacksmiths adapting their techniques. Historians still debate whether tinsmithing emerged as an offshoot of blacksmithing or as a completely separate craft. You hold the metal sheet that will be turned into a generous funnel to discharge water from the cistern and notice its thickness. Thin enough to bend, but strong enough not to tear when rust sets in. As you heat the metal over the burning coals, you feel the heat radiate through the bones of your fingers, like a fiery embrace. Then you remove the glowing sheet and rest it on the curved anvil, gently shaking the lightweight bending hammer. Each blow is calculated, almost rhythmic, and you notice the hollow sound of the metal giving way under the weight, a bronzed ASMR that would chill the heart of any absent-minded person. Fun fact, in some villages in northern Italy, medieval tinsmiths added silk crumbs from burnt bones to tin and copper alloys when soldering, believing that the animal remains gave the joints extra strength. The theory is bizarre, but it was so widespread that anyone who dared question it was called a heretic by experienced tinsmiths. You wonder if that patch really would last longer in the rain, or if it just smelled worse when the metal got dirty. As you bend the sheet metal to shape the funnel, your hands experience conflicting sensations. The firmness of the hammer, the smoothness of the bend, the grainy texture of the curved anvil. You remember yesterday's cold morning, when the ice nearly collapsed the anvil under the weight of a loose ingot. Who knew working with metal also included improvising as a bricklayer? And you let out a suppressed laugh. This memory is your favorite callback, proof that no matter how bad things seem, you always find a way to move forward. At the heart of tinsmithing, technical knowledge comes not only from steel and fire, but from measuring formulas. 45-degree angles to fit bends without warping the sheet metal, the exact amount of tin to cover wells and prevent cracks, and the ideal pressure of the bending hammer to avoid overstretching the metal. These standards are documented in Northern European tinsmiths' guilds from the 1290s onwards, but some argue that similar practices existed as early as the 11th century, passed down orally in family workshops. You take a deep breath and resume your work, noticing the aroma of heated metal mixed with the smell of mutton tallow spread on the wheels of the bellows, a rustic lubricant that makes it easier to blow and lends a bittersweet note to the atmosphere. With each puff, the fire crackles, and small sparks leap like fireflies escaping from a carpet of tall grass. The heat beats in your chest, almost matching the rhythm of your heart. Mainstream historical fact, it is known that in 1271, the city of Paris regulated tinsmiths along with goldsmiths, establishing minimum weights for metal sheets used in basins and cauldrons, a pioneering rule that guaranteed uniformity and protected the consumer from fragile products. These regulations were written down on parchment rolls that are still studied by economic history researchers today. You pause and examine the metal cutout, which is already beginning to take the shape of a large funnel, with symmetrical edges and a smooth surface. Filing away imperfections requires the patience of a mark. Each pass of the file removes barely noticeable chips, revealing a polished shine beneath the soot. At that moment, you make a silent joke. Who would have thought that relaxing would be working in slow motion with the file? The academic world still debates whether tinsmithing techniques developed independently in different regions or whether there was a single point of diffusion, perhaps linked to the pilgrimage routes that crossed Europe. Some scholars point to evidence of migration of artisans between Castile and Flanders, while others believe that the craft emerged simultaneously in different urban centers as a result of the common need to transport water and store food. You drop the hammer and pick up a horsehair brush to brush away the excess filings, feeling the gentle scrape of the bristles against the nearly finished sheet metal. The sound is reminiscent of the rustling of silk, a curious contrast to the hardness of the metal. Another joke, nothing like a brush comb for gray metal. Finally, it's time to join the parts. You heat the edges again, apply a quick string of tin solder, and crank the bellows with moderate force. The metal melts in a melodious fusion, a sound that borders on a sigh, as you seal the weld with light blows of a dowel hammer, a precise technique that, if overdone, could crack the joint. When the funnel is ready, you carefully dip it into the cold water. A brief hiss, followed by delicate clouds of steam that soothe your eyes, almost caressing your eyelids. The piece emerges without cracks, displaying perfect contours. You touch the surface and feel the damp cold, a caress that confirms the success of the work. You sigh with satisfaction and make your last joke of the day. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear aprons and hammers to tame the flow of water. In that moment, you know that whether you are a tinker or a blacksmith, the power of witnessing the transformation of metal continues to be the fire that fuels your courage. You watch the frenetic hustle and bustle of the market around the forge, where merchants' stalls jostle for space with loud cries and carriages creaking over uneven cobblestones. Each iron bale you sell there carries not only weight, but also the value of affecting a small part of the local economy. You carry a pile of blades, horseshoes, and polished ingots to your makeshift stand, arrange your wares on the wooden table, and sigh. Medieval markets, where even iron advertises itself. Merchants shout offers and discounts, and the smell of spices mixes with that of coal. A pile of black peppercorns stands out in unbleached linen bags nearby. In front of you, coins jingle as a curious trader examines them in the setting sun. You joke, nothing like the smell of pepper to go with soot. The blacksmith chef's official combination. In the 14th century, annual fairs such as Champagne became strategic trading hubs, moving thousands of tons of metal and other goods, and helping to finance the construction of cathedrals and fortifications. It is in this environment that you offer your wares to itinerant merchants, knowing that a single contract can guarantee a supply of coal for months and even alleviate the burden of local taxes. Fun fact, in some villages in France, the market included sound auctions, where blacksmiths would bang their tools together to demonstrate the quality of their metal. The final price was influenced not by the look, but by the timbre of the clang. You attended one once and swore you heard a heavenly gall, until you discovered it was just a cart rolling by. As you negotiate, you notice appraising looks on the merchants' faces. Every curve of the blade, every glint of the metal, is inspected with an imaginary magnifying glass. You adjust your apron, give a short laugh, and say in a low voice, "If this were a beauty show, I'd send a medal to the catwalk." But behind the humor, you know that proven quality earns reputation, and reputation earns future contracts. The scholarly debate over medieval trade routes still questions whether the exchange network spurred technological innovation in the workshops or simply cemented established practices, limiting the spread of forging secrets. You consider this as you count coins, wondering whether each shilling will have the power to conquer new markets or whether it will be spent on hard-earned bread at the end of the month. You hold up a perfectly fitting horseshoe and demonstrate it to a customer seeking solidity. You fit it onto a nail, strike it twice, and watch the structured echo reverberate around the square. The customer smiles with satisfaction and closes the deal, offering 3 gold coins for 10 pieces, a generous price that makes your heart flutter with relief and pride. You silently joke, 3 gold coins for every melodious beat. As you pack the horseshoes, you feel the rough feel of the linen sack's handles and the earthy smell of aged leather. A handful of coins fall into the sack with a clink that sounds like victory music. You crack a joke. Money fits well on iron, and also cracks better than a noble feast. Informal traders, known as market faithful, circulate among the stalls offering credit and advances. They write down their debts in a hardcover book and, in exchange, guarantee an immediate supply of coal or ore, charging interest that varies according to the season. You've borrowed money this way before. In times of need, 5% interest a month seemed to make tomorrow's bread cheaper. With each entry on the parchment, you feel the weight of the debt grow a little heavier. Extra side fun fact. In medieval England, some blacksmiths formed buying clubs where they would band together in groups of 5 to negotiate collective prices for raw materials, earning discount of up to 15% from local miners. You tried to convince 4 of your colleagues to join this scheme, but 2 of them gave up when they realized that sharing coal meant sharing the blame for delays. When it's time to close the till, you count each coin with precision, feeling the soft bark of the leather sack against your thumb. The market slowly fades as the torches are extinguished. Vendors pack up their stalls, and the trading floors give way to the murmur of night. You carry the heavy sack back to the forge and whisper to yourself. A round trip with gold on your back is a Herculean exercise. You keep part of your profits in a locked chest in your workshop, feel the cold touch of the metal as you put the key in the bolt, and make an inside joke. Medieval safe, guaranteed to fall in case of a rat invasion. But deep down, you know that that little treasure represents more than coins. It is security, autonomy, and proof that your work is worth every drop of sweat. Finally, you light a candle to light the way back home. Smell the sweet wax that contrasts with the soot still stuck to your apron, and reflect that, in the end, the market and exchanges are more than commerce. They're the web that connects trades, families, and stories through time. You sigh and make the last joke of the day. Without a market, iron became a legend. With it, it became life. You wake up before the sun, but today is not the day to hammer with brute force. It is the day to feel the pulse of innovation that begins to transform each blow of the bellows and each rotation of a water wheel into mechanical magic. You walk to the furnace, and instead of turning on the bellows manually, you position the lever that activates the blowing mediated by a set of levers and belts. The air enters the heart of the fire like a light sigh, creating a more stable and less exhausting flame for your still sleepy body. The hammering now has an almost musical rhythm. The heated metal dances beneath your hammer while a water-powered wheel keeps the bellows pulsing steadily, freeing your arm for fine adjustments instead of insistently blowing. It's like swapping your morning workout for a ballet class. You control the dance, rather than being swept along by the grueling rhythm. Historians record that, in the late 13th century, watermills were adapted to move bellows continuously, increasing productivity by up to 70% without exhausting apprentices. Each gear and pulley emits a faint metallic squeak, mixed with the familiar aroma of charcoal and linseed oil. You run your hand over the gear teeth to feel their cool, uneven texture, noticing the ancient care that goes into keeping this array of parts working in harmony. A side note, in some parts of the Rhineland, blacksmiths added small drops of onion oil to the gears to reduce friction. They believed the organic compound softened the iron without the need for constant retouching. You chuckle. Lubricant that tastes like medieval salad, almost perfect for barbecue. As you inspect the system, you notice the subtle swaying of the chains connecting the main shaft to the bellows. Each slap of water against the wheel sends a long sigh through the iron, and you mentally compare it to the sound of gentle waves on a beach, liquid ASMR, if there's such a thing. This drastic change reminds you of the stationary axe craze of the past, and the joke comes, although fueling a mill is cheaper than fueling human lungs. The hydraulic bellows don't eliminate all difficulties. Regulating the airflow still requires your sensitive touch. You adjust the valve by hand, calibrating the blow until the fire reaches the desired hue, from deep red to vivid orange. Temperature is documented as critical to high-quality steel, and scholarly debates still rage over whether the most successful smiths achieve fire control through empirical measurement or accumulated intuition. As the heat dances, you organize the space around the system. You clean away carbon and oil residue that could clog gears, remembering a time when a stubborn granule jammed the bellows during a ford for the feudal lord. The sudden silence made even the walls get scared. You chuckle softly, nothing like a mechanical choking to remind you that even metal needs cleaning. Taking advantage of the slack in the air, you take up the light hammer again and experiment with drawing techniques that previously required Herculean effort. Now, you guide the metal slowly, make precise movements, bend more safely and without shaking, like a painter applying final brushstrokes. The resulting piece displays smoother, more uniform contours, proving that technology and art can go hand in hand. Extra side-eye. In certain trades in Naples, pioneering tinsmiths use gears driven by rudimentary steam chambers, experiments that some called steam furnaces and others called alchemist follies. You like to try one of these systems, but for now you are content with not having to push the bellows like a convict on a galleon. The clang of the hammer now resonates in a mechanical rhythm, echoing through the shed like a finely tuned metronome. You focus your attention on the details. Each strike extracts hundredths of a millimeter from the metal, allowing your touch to define almost surgical thicknesses. It is the revolution that transforms the blacksmith from a brute warrior into a precision craftsman. To complete the transformation, you activate the mechanical arm, a simple counterweight that raises and lowers heavy hammers, freeing your hands for fine adjustments. This mechanism dates back to the late 14th century, when English blacksmiths adapted levers and pulleys from metalwork shops to create automatic hammers. This advancement speeds up repetitive work and reduces chronic shoulder injuries, though it still requires careful supervision to avoid untimely hammering. You pull out the hand hammer, feel the mechanical force, and feel the weight disappear, almost like lifting a backpack full of rocks off your back. The sensation sparks an inside joke. Pulling a lever has become more satisfying than pulling hot iron. As you watch the final piece take shape, You notice the contrast between past and present. The sweat still drips, the heat still burns, but now there's more room for creativity than for mere physical endurance. With each movement of the mechanism, you are reminded that innovation is as valuable a fuel as coal itself. Finally, you carefully turn off the system, close the valves, cool the gears with a damp cloth to prevent oxidation, and give a final nod of respect to the complex mechanical orchestra. You sigh, touch the shiny steel, and joke. Who would have thought that one day I would call a wooden doll my co-worker? The gentle pulse of water returning to the river's course sounds like distant applause as you clean your tools and go through your maintenance checklist. Technology has transformed your craft, but it has retained the core of your power, the ability to harness fire and metal. You brush the soot from the finished blade and hold it up to the flickering torchlight, admiring its timeless silvery sheen. Every ripple in the metal tells a story of heat, hammering, and care, and you realize for the first time in days that your hands not only forged objects, but left their mark on centuries to come. The legacy of the medieval smith lives on in ornate gates, bold keys, and suits of armor that still rest in museums today. Testament to your silent craft. As you run the tip of a soft cloth over the blade, you feel the distant echo of all that your descendants will hear millennia later. Forged pieces inspired Renaissance artists to incorporate metal details into sacred sculptures, and to this day collectors vie for relics that bear their ancestral fingerprints. It's remarkable to know that, even without knowing how to read or write, their millimeter-perfect strokes would echo in modern exhibits, connecting the hammer of the Middle Ages to the climate-controlled display of a contemporary museum. The faint scent of ancient oil, embedded in the grooves of a Gothic window frame, still mingles with the aroma of aged oak, tangible proof that your forge has helped build structures that have withstood storms and conflicts. You make a silent joke. Who knew that instead of selfies, my ancestors hung ornamental railings to immortalize the guild's name? This light-hearted humor cuts through the pride that pulses through your veins, reminding you that behind every twisted iron arch is the sweat of an unseen craftsman. Marginal curiosity. In certain Benedictine abbeys of the 16th century, monks made special pilgrimages to contemplate the railings forged by masters of their craft, believing that the iron pattern conveyed divine messages engraved with fire and hammer. They recorded in their codices poetic descriptions of the work of blacksmiths, comparing veins of metal to veins of marble, and seeing in the metallic interweaving symbols of spiritual interconnection. You set the blade down on its stand and walk over to the makeshift gallery on the workshop wall, where you've hung replicas of special horseshoes and ornamental keys. Each piece bears a unique design, a scrollwork here, a carving there, and you feel the weight of a heritage that transcends your daily craft. The soft clink of metal against the hook produces an almost hypnotic ASMR that makes you close your eyes for a moment and wonder, did my ancestors dream of this moment of quiet glory? As you walk through the pieces, you're reminded of a historical fact. In the late 15th century, the walls of Carcassonne incorporated ornate iron gates created by blacksmiths from guilds like yours, and these gates have survived centuries of war and restoration. This badge of durability makes you raise your chin and chuckle softly. I've survived sparks, cold, and feuds, but who would have thought my iron would become the guardian of castles? Historians still debate whether the prestige of decorative blacksmiths drove the development of cast iron in the mid-16th century, or whether this advance resulted from the growing demand for monumental architectural pieces. You can imagine long-bearded scholars debating this question in foggy libraries, immersed in parchment, where you simply breathe in the pleasure of seeing the art materialized on centuries-old walls. The touch of your hand glides across a forged grate, the cool surface conveying a sense of permanence that defies the relentless flow of time. You mentally compare its solidity to the rich flavor of strong coffee. Though coffee didn't exist in the Middle Ages, the metaphor serves to illustrate the lasting impact of your work on people's lives. And let's face it, laughing in anachronisms is one of the few freedoms left to a craftsman without Wi-Fi. Extra side fun fact. In villages near Florence, Renaissance sculptors would commission specific blacksmiths to craft details on balcony railings, believing that the heat of iron complemented the coolness of marble and created a sensory harmony between organic and inorganic elements. You take pride in knowing that your craft was a silent partner in the artistic symphony that defined an era. As you brush off your apron, you reflect on the responsibility of perpetuating ancient techniques. The same pattern of forging, carefully passed down from master to apprentice over generations, echoes in keys that still turn the locks of restored castles today. This teaching ritual ensures that the iron not only survives, but continues to tell ancient secrets in every fold and notch. The soft creak of the lever that opens the great iron door ends your contemplation. You tilt your head, watch the last images of twilight reflected in the metal, and make one last inside joke. Who would have thought that my memories would be carved into bars instead of photographs? The joke dissolves any trace of excessive grandiosity, reminding you that in the end, it is the craftsman's talent that survives, not his ego. You put away your tools, feeling the comfortable weight of the sledgehammer on your shoulder and the earthy aroma of charcoal mixed with linseed oil permeating the air. Each object hanging on that wall is a reminder that your craft, though arduous, transcends your own existence and finds new life in each visitor who admires the work without knowing the maker. Finally, you light a final candle, its flames dancing softly against the rows of grates and keys. The subtle glow casts shadows that resemble unfinished arabesques. And you smile at the realization that even when your forge is extinguished, its metallic legacy will continue to light the imagination of those who cross your path. You place the hammer on the stand for the last time, feeling the steady echo of the metal against the anvil as a silent goodbye. Your shoulders relax, but your mind keeps spinning. Is all this sweat, all this soot, and relentless noise really worth it? You take a deep breath and look out the window at the landscape. Rolling fields, dark earth ready for seed, the sun kissing the first green leaves. Maybe it would be easier to trade that heavy apron for a pair of soft leather boots and a rake. But let's face it, you'd still be making jokes about sowing jokes in the fields, even between rows of corn. As you wipe the excess soot from your hands, you feel the rough feel of your apron's leather and remember the day you tried to grow radishes on the edge of the village. You harvested a few, but spent so much time weeding that you almost missed the deadline for horseshoes. The field requires your own effort, digging, plowing, watering, a cycle of moderate endurance rather than bursts of strength. You imagine the fresh smell of damp earth, the soft sound of a rake raking the soil, and for a moment you almost jump out of your medieval heels. Fun fact, in some parts of medieval Europe, farmers would spread wood ash on their fields after harvesting, believing it would improve soil fertility and speed plant growth, a technique that many today call a pioneer in nutrient cycling. You smile at the contrast. Instead of ash stuck to your face, it would be ash under your fingernails, but nothing a dip in a river couldn't fix. In the 13th century, rural statistics indicate that up to 80% of the population lived off the land, and despite plagues and uncertain harvests, there was basic security, bread on the plate, grass for the cattle, and a routine marked by sunrise and sunset, without major shocks from furnace failing or a feudal lord demanding metallic glory. It is comforting to imagine a workday that begins with a bird song instead of the crackling of coal. But let's be honest, the countryside isn't all pastoral poetry. Historians still debate whether medieval farming actually offered more economic stability than skilled urban crafts, since bad harvests could devastate entire families and force forced migrations. You shake your head and mentally answer, I'd rather risk tetanus than typhus and starvation. The pest, the crop taxes, the threat of serfdom, all of it weighs as heavily as a 2-pound hammer. In the fields, however, there is a different rhythm. You would feel the sun warming your face, the coolness of the morning air, the chirping of crickets at dusk. Sounds so soft they almost rival the ASMR of blowing the bellows, but much slower, less aggressive. 3 jokes suddenly spring to mind. Watering messes up my schedule, but at least it doesn't burn my skin like forging. Harvesting wheat is like a marathon with the reward of bread. Hard soil is better than a feudal crown stiffening my spine. You remember the dream you had at the end of an exhausting night? in which you ran freely through the meadows, without an apron, without a bellows, without haste, and you feel a tug of longing for that relief. But, on the other hand, think of the unpredictable seasons. Floods in spring, drought in summer, frost on the eve of harvest. The land can be generous, but it can turn enemy in the blink of an eye. And yet farming brought seasonal celebrations. Planting festivals, fire dances, harvest celebrations with barley cakes, and songs of thanksgiving. You imagine singing carols with your neighbors, cup of meat in hand, unwrapping joy to the sounds of lutes and flutes, a kind of social reward that blacksmiths enjoyed only when, on rare occasions, the feudal lord hosted a banquet after a military victory. But of course the pastoral dress brings its own fumes. Rats devouring seeds, moldy hay causing allergies, endless scrolls of accounting for rural taxes. No job is without headaches. The difference is the type of noise. Blacksmithing was a continuous thunderstorm. The field is a constant buzz of insects and a murmur of the wind. You stare at the now-cold anvil and make one last inside joke. Maybe I'll plant a joke there among the corn and reap laughter in the summer. The soil murmurs promises of a gentler craft, but uncertainty whispers back that without your blades and tools, the harvest will be stuck too. Yet when you extinguish the furnace and close the iron door, you feel a gentle relief, almost as if you had exchanged heavy armor for a light cloak. The sight of the fields outside shines in your mind like an invitation. The craftsman can be reborn as a farmer, without anvil and without the tedium of sparks, but with the raw taste of the earth and the free breath of the wind. You take a deep breath, feel the chill of twilight, and whisper, "Maybe, but we'll talk again tomorrow." The iron waits, but the ground also calls. Now you slow down, take a deep breath, feeling each breath expand your chest and calm the racing heartbeat. Memories of sparks, hammer, and heat blend with images of rolling fields, like a soft dream dissolving into the dark. Let that final image permeate your mind. The delicate contrast between the glow of the forge and the serene green of the fields. Feel the sand between your toes, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, the stillness before the first bird calls. Every detail stretches, every color blends. The scenery becomes soft as a lullaby. You are safe. You have survived the fire, the pressure, and the exhaustion. Now imagine a warm breeze caressing your face, blowing away the sooty residue and bringing the earthy fragrance of the night. Your muscles relax more and more with each passing second. Your thoughts flow like gentle streams. There is no castle wall, no glowing furnace, just the gentle breath of approaching sleep. Reassure yourself. Tomorrow, the anvil may call you again, but today, you can surrender the iron to silence. The story comes to an end. No hammer noise, no sparks whistling, just a quiet sigh. It's time to close your eyes and let the darkness envelop you like a cozy blanket. May tranquility lull you. May the promises of distant fields dance in your dreams, and may each breath weave a deep rest. The forge of day closes, and a furnace of sleep is kindled. And a script, sweet dreams.